finally into this point where we get to the New Testament, and of course, the New Testament starts with the birth of Jesus. And John talked last week about the intertestamental period and sort of what was going on in this period between Malachi and Matthew. And or really, if you want to get technical, the Gospel of Mark was written first. But between this gap between the Old Testament and the New Testament, just kind of what was going on, that period of about 400 years, and the spread of Hellenism with Alexander the Great, just making everything just kind of accessible with the implementation of roads and the implementation of the Greek language as a common language. So John did a really good job of just presenting that, and so now we're in this world where things are about to get shaken because there's this guy Jesus that comes on the scene, and I'm sure it's a story that for a lot of us has been driven into our head a million times. So I actually wanted to start off today. I want you guys to tell me the story of the birth of Jesus. So Mary gets the sign from Jesus, from Gabriel, the message from Gabriel that she's going to bear a son and he's going to be the Messiah. Freaky stuff, right? Okay, what else? Right? Mary's pregnant, which is significant because she's a virgin, right? This is kind of one of those things, if you can figure out math, the one thing needs to happen in order to make a baby, and if Mary's a virgin, that one thing doesn't happen, which means this is preposterous to think of, right? So Jesus is born where? In Bethlehem? In a manger? Because there's no room in the inn. That's right. What else is going on?
Wasn't there a census happening?
The census is happening, right? It's important. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, 3 wise men appear. Okay. By following the North Star. That's right. Cool. All right. So that's sort of the basic outline for kind of what happens. But of course, there's a lot more detail in there. We're going to talk a little bit about that detail, about what it means finally that Jesus is here. But I think ultimately, while this story is so powerful, just on its own merit, I think there's some things that we miss because not sure if you know this, but the Bible was written not quite 2,000 years ago, at least the New Testament, and in 2,000 years, halfway across the world, there's a lot of cultural barriers and a lot of language barriers and a lot of just in general misinterpretations and miscommunications that we make. So it kind of makes it a little bit odd. Where it's kind of like playing Chinese telephone. Like, you guys remember playing Chinese telephone in elementary school, or did they not do that anymore? Like, yeah, so I'll come up to you and I'll whisper something to you, and then you have to whisper that to somebody else. And by the time it comes around, you turn blueberry pancakes into butterscotch waffles. There you go.
But why is it called Chinese telephone? It's just called telephone now.
I grew up thinking it was Chinese telephone, but people were a lot less culturally sensitive when I was growing up. I said culturally insensitive, not racist. Although, kind of.
I mean,
yeah, so that's fine. So yeah, but you guys get the gist. Like, remember, you turn like blueberry pancakes into butterscotch waffles or things like that, or like, you just after time, every time the story gets told, every time there's different things happening in the world, every time there's a major event, it sort of muddles our image of an original story quickly. So like, you ever like watch a movie from the 70s and you're like, that makes no sense, especially like movies from the 70s that like take place in the future because they're trying to make predictions, and it's like Back to the Future, they're like, oh yeah, well in 2015 they're gonna have hoverboards and vests that zip up and waterproof shoes and things like that. And it's like, I'd kill for waterproof socks, like,
yeah.
or just not negative 25 degrees temperatures in Iowa. Yeah, just a lot of stuff gets lost. And what I want to try to do is uncover a little bit of the things that I think we lose in this story. So Jesus is born in the manger. You guys talked a little bit about it. Why is Jesus born in the manger? I'm not trying to ask any hard questions today.
Because they were running away and all the rooms and places were pretty much full and
Sure.
occupied.
There's no room at the inn.
Yeah.
Right. That's what the text says. There's no room at the inn. So yeah, and you're right. They're running, but they're not so much running away as they are. Again, they're going to the census. Herod has decreed the census. So Joseph is naturally moving. Moving that he's required to do that, but of course pregnant Mary and all that, and Herod has the issue out of like kill all the babies, and because he doesn't want any babies because he knows that this prophecy of the coming king that's going to come in through a baby. So he's like, well, if we just kill all the babies, then the baby can't become a king and he can't overthrow me. Especially because we'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end, but the type of king that Jesus is not the type of king that people expected to come. Like that's why Jesus is rejected so much when he actually comes. It's why people don't like him, especially the Pharisees, because they're expecting something different. They're expecting what we call a Davidic Messiah, which is somebody who's supposed to be like David. He's supposed to be a warrior. He's supposed to be somebody strong. Remember, Israel's in a time of captivity right now. There's the Roman Empire, which is huge, and the Roman Empire is kind of oppressive, especially towards people that don't believe what they believe. They're a little bit oppressive to some of the Jews, not to some other ones. They're like Paul is a good Jew, and because he's a persecutor, he kills for the sake of Jews because the Romans are like the Jews. We're comfortable with these Jews and that, but they don't like it when people come in and be like, hey, like no, because Jesus is here now, right? And then so that's why Paul is all great, all that, right? But Roman citizens get special treatment. Israel's people don't. They're and just incredibly persecuted people. They're constantly living in fear, and they're constantly in places that are just running. It's almost like a retelling of Israel in the wilderness. We talked about that one of the first few weeks. I know it's been a while because we spent a lot of time in the Old Testament, but it's kind of like that. And so again, Herod's expecting this Davidic Messiah that's going to come up, rise up, be big and strong. I like to imagine Dwayne the Rock Johnson and like pull out a sword and just be that Davidic Messiah, be that guy that nobody can stop, be that guy that takes over the kingship. But there's a couple things when we think about this story then that don't make a lot of sense if we read this now. Like they make sense to us as a culture because we just read it and we're like, yeah, cool, that makes sense. But when we actually look at the text, it's actually not so simple. It's not so easy. And when you ask questions, the Bible does a really fun thing where when you ask questions about what the text says, you wind up learning a lot more cool things. It's called biblical interpretation, hermeneutics. It's awesome. We can talk more about that later if you want. But when you ask questions about the text, then there's things that we wind up learning, and I want to share with you some of the things I think we should be learning about this. So first of all, there's a couple problems. We're going to focus a lot on the inn tonight. There's no room at the inn. So first of all, there's a couple problems with this idea of there's no room at the inn, so Jesus is born in a manger. We've all seen those nativity sets where they're out, there's the cardboard cutouts and all that, and sometimes they're actually like 3D. They're somebody spent a little bit more money, and there's actually like plastic baby Jesus dolls and shepherds and wise men. My parents had a nativity set every Christmas. It's great. Nothing wrong with those, but they don't quite capture the image of what we're trying to actually picture here. So first of all, we have to think a little bit. The city of Bethlehem. That's the city that Joseph's going to. So first of all, right off the bat, this should be a city that Joseph is welcome to pretty much anywhere. Because if you read in verse 4, I'm in Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, verse 4. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed. So they were going to the census, right? But they go to Bethlehem on their way, and that's where they're kind of stopped. But it says right there that Bethlehem is the city of David. And right after that, it says that Joseph's in the lineage of David. We know this because in Matthew we get and earlier in Luke, we get later in Luke actually. We get a genealogy of Jesus. Maybe it's Mark. Yeah, but we get the genealogy of Jesus. So we see Jesus is the son of this person, who's the son of this person, who's the son of that person, right? That's how genealogies work. We've all seen family trees. And eventually, Joseph's bloodline goes straight up to David. And then David, of course, is in the bloodline of Noah and Adam and Abraham and a bunch of other really cool people. But the fact that Bethlehem is the city of David, that means that, first of all, this is Joseph's village of origin. They call it the city of David. It's a city that should be honorable and respectful to him on that purpose alone. That at one point, families were they were open. They were not just me, my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad. Like they were like everything up to like second cousins, like as part of a society, as part of a tribe. And with that, those would be a lot of times communities. And then eventually communities grow and people move and things like that, and then you get the cities and things like that. But they stay true to their roots. So because Joseph's family has a lot of ties to Bethlehem, just kind of doesn't make sense that there's no rooms open for him. People would have considered it an honor to have him. Not only that, but they would have also considered it an honor to have him specifically because he's in the line of David. Because people think highly of David, right? Acts calls David a man after God's own heart. So if this is the city of David and this is Joseph's town of origin, then why is it so hard for him to get a room? And not only that, but you look, verse 6, still Luke 2, and while they were there, the time had come for them to give birth. Too often, this is a part of the story we get wrong. And one of the other parts of the story we get wrong. When we think of this story, them riding into town, Mary's practically already in labor, right? I mean, at least that's what I grew up believing. And Mary's already in labor, and they give birth that night. They're like, kind of well, I don't have to use another analogy because you guys get it. About to go into labor, needs to get somewhere now so that process can happen. And because she's about to pop, right? Because that's how pregnancy works, right? I don't know. I'm not a woman. But that verse 6, and it says, and while they were there, that implies that there's several days. That implies that there's a certain amount of time. Because while they were there is actually, just by the way that it's worded, the way that it's phrased, the words around it is actually meaning that they're there for a longer period of time. It's not just one day.
Is that true for all the other versions of the Bible, like the King James Version?
Mm-hmm. King James Version actually uses the words days. But when I say things about this is what the text says, I'm usually referring to the Greek text. But it doesn't matter. Each one, as long as you can imagine that while they were there implies that there's several days, which it does in the text, and the King James one says the days while they were there. So there's a long period of time that they're there. It's several days. So you're telling me that the inn is booked? I mean, it's not like Iowa State and Iowa are playing in Iowa State. It's not like football game in Iowa, right? Where literally everywhere is booked in town and people are stumbling in game day I'm going to try to find a hotel room. It's like, no, you're going to have to go to Cedar Rapids and find somewhere because you're not going to find anywhere in town. There's not that way, especially once game day passes, everybody leaves and all of a sudden there's a ton of hotel rooms, right? They're there for a few days, so why on earth would there be no room in an inn? I mean, maybe for one night, sure, but for several nights, that doesn't really make any sense. And last thing, so we have to remember that Joseph, being a Jew, excuse me, has a Jewish family. So him and Mary are both Jewish, and Bethlehem, being the city of David, very Jewish city. So they're bound together in that way. The Jewish community was very open and welcoming to other Jewish people in that time, in that area. They're very hospitable. And then not only that, but culturally, Middle Eastern people are a lot more hospitable than Americans. Even Midwesterners are incredibly hospitable. But people in the Middle East consider it an honor, especially back in the early first century. It would be an incredible honor to have somebody, especially somebody of the same tribe, of the same clan, of the same Jewish heritage. They would have considered that just an honor to have them. Now, there's a couple things about this that kind of you can maybe push back a little bit. Well, just because they're a Jewish family and they're honored, well, remember too that Joseph and Mary are betrothed. So betrothed just means pledged. It's practically the same as an engagement nowadays. It's they weren't married, but they were going to get married. It's pretty much the same as an engagement. You can talk to Keegan about that later because he knows what that's like. But with that, then there's the possibility of perhaps there was some shame involved in that because, the text tells us, and I believe that Mary was a virgin, but, first century people seeing that in their own eyes, hey, I'm still a virgin. God did this, right? Well, maybe people would have made some wrong assumptions and decided that it might be an honor to have a family, but to bring in that shame into our house, maybe not. So maybe they were turned away for that reason, or to bring that shame into our inn, maybe they were turned away for that reason. Or there's the other possibility of the fact that maybe the one that I think is more likely is I think Joseph's just asking around to specific places because he has a pregnant wife and there's the census happening and Herod's trying to kill all the babies. But, Jesus is going to be a baby and Joseph doesn't want his baby to die, especially since he knows he's the Messiah, right? Kind of makes sense. Maybe talk to people you trust a little bit more. Maybe talk to people that you know a little bit better. Try to figure out things rather than just walking up to the motel late. And, can we have a room? My wife there, she's definitely not pregnant, by the way. She's not about to pop. It's okay. Don't worry about that. We just like a room, please. So you don't necessarily trust that person, especially if they're good citizens. They report. They probably get a reward, right? So there's a couple things about that kind of don't make sense, but then also kind of ask us to raise a little bit more questions, maybe make us to make a little bit more assumptions or interpretations based off of what the text actually says. But I think in order to get an idea, I think we need to understand a little bit more about what a home looked like in the 21st or in the first century. So specifically in the Middle East. So homes would have actually looked quite a bit different. Because of a few reasons. This is part of the reason why I brought the drawing pad too. So a traditional home would have only had 2 rooms in it. So you have here, okay, and then we're going to go down here. Boop. Okay, and here you're going to get some stairs. I'm really great at drawing, by the way. These are some curved stairs. These people had weird feet back in the day too. True. This is a door, and for the sake of that, we're just going to draw that. All right, so this is kind of what the place would look like, and then of course these were usually built on hills, right? This is actually like how a first century home would have been built in the Middle East. They were built this way, and they were built this way for a certain reason, all right? And then here we would have a manger. So this would have been the family room. And this would have been the combination kitchen, bathroom, living room, and bedrooms. Because culturally, this is just kind of the way it works. They built houses with one roof. Very open concept, very, very nice. Chip and Joanna would be very proud of all these. But they would be very open concept, very open, very, families just slept together in the same room. People didn't think twice about it. They cooked where they went to the bathroom. I mean, not like right there, but it'd be like in the same room. You could see both happening at the same time. Like, just not very uncommon. And then there's that. And this, by the way, I should have clarified. This is actually meant to be from a side view. So, these are your walls going up. But for the sake of doing multiple arguments, I'm just gonna do a little bit of the inside of what this would have looked like if you tipped it, right? So this is just a wall. So this is actually hill. Got it? Cool, makes sense? Cool. So everything would have been in this room, right? And here's our manger. You have your troughs and you have excuse me. Pots likely filled with water and other things that you're trying to store, right? So in here would have been the stable. And for the sake, we're going to mark this family room. Tracking with me so far? Cool. So very 2-room houses, but only one division in the whole house for the most part. And it's the stable, and of course there would be death to this house too. And so there's a reason for this though. So the reasons would be you'd want to bring your animals in For a few reasons. One, when it gets really cold in the winter, you want to bring your animals in so they don't freeze to death and die. A lot of people were reliant on their production from cattle and cows and farms and things like that. They'd want to have their animals kept inside. Another thing, to protect them, right? For a few reasons. Theft, because if your animals are just out in the middle of the night, nothing's stopping somebody from coming and cutting their restraints and leading them somewhere else, stealing a cow, stealing cattle, or like wolves or coyotes and things like that, like coming in and killing your livestock. Like, it's a safety thing, right? So some people did it year round, some people did it just in cold temperatures, but there was a room in the house built specifically for animals, which helps us. This is not only just historical, but this is also biblical, right? So this is not just me saying that some scholars said that this was true, therefore it's true. So we're going to actually take a look way back in the Old Testament. We're going to take a look at Judges. So if you're with me, we're at Judges 11. And we're going to read a little bit of the story of a guy named Jephthah. All right, maybe a name you heard. It's a very fun word to say. Jephthah. So I want to read the story of Jephthah for you guys for a little bit. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mitzvah of Gilead. And from Mitzvah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's. And I will offer it up for a burnt offering." So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand, and he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities as far as Abel Keramim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Then Jephthah came to his home in Mitzvah. And behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." And he said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord." She said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth. And now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites." So she said to her father, "Let the thing be done for me. Leave me alone 2 months that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions." So he said, "Go." Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed and with her companions and wept for virginity on the mountains. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah to Gilead 4 days in the year. It's a very tragic story. It's very Shakespearean, where somebody makes a promise and things like that, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense when you read it unless you understand the house, a Middle Eastern house. Because why on earth would anybody say, "If you deliver my enemies to me, I'll kill the first thing that comes out of my house"? Unless your animals stay in that house. Because why on earth does it make sense for everybody, let alone somebody, a man of the Lord, to say, "God, sure, I'll give you the first thing that comes out of my house. I'm going to give you my daughter, or my only daughter. Or I'll give you my wife." Who does that? Doesn't make a lot of sense, but he was expecting a sheep or a lamb, maybe a goat, perhaps something bigger, a cattle, a bull, cow. But unfortunately he comes home and his daughter comes out shaking tambourines and is happy because her father is home. When in reality, what she just did while she was celebrating had to have been the worst moment of his life. So this concept of what the house is, it totally changes our idea about what it looked like in the first century. And it doesn't just change the way how we read the story of Jephthah and Judges, but it changed the way that we should read the story of Jesus. Because you guys have mentioned it, there's no room in the inn. Well, you guys know me and I like Greek. We're going to learn a few Greek words, okay? It's Greek word tapas. Right? Everybody say tapas. Tapas. Right? Sounds kind of like that Mexican food tapas, but tapas. Okay? Tapas means space. Any sort of defined space. Right? Another word for you. This one's fun. Paudoichio. Say paudoichio. Paudoichio. Right? The X is sound like a CH. This is your P, this is your D, of course. E. Paudoichio. Right? So there's two words for you. If Luke and Matthew meant to say an inn in the way that we think of an inn today, a Motel 6, a Super 8, something like that, he would use this word. Because this word translates to a commercial inn. This is what translates to a motel or somewhere where you get to stay a night for money. But instead, they use the word tapas. Space. So what is this space, then we have to ask, right? Well, for families that had some money, or some land, or both, they've had another room. This room, another fun Greek word for you. I promise, last Greek word. Is it sideways? No? Katalima. Katalima. Probably, actually. Katalima means guest room or upper room. We see this word katalima used other times in the gospel. We see it used in specifically in Luke 22, where Jesus is about to have the Last Supper, the Passover with the disciples. He said, "Take, this is my body. This is my blood poured out for you." This is an upper room, right? It's called an upper room, but really it's just a guest room, right? Because it's not actually elevated. It's not like a second floor of a house. It's a side room. So family would have had their door here. There would have been a separate door here. It's just an extra room in your house that is cut off from the family room and has its own separate entrance, right? Because again, Middle Eastern people are very hospitable. And not only that, but when people came to visit, they didn't come to visit for a day or two. They came to visit for a week or two. So they would house somebody for as long as they could. Kind of like people having spare bedrooms now, except this is totally detached, right? This upper room. So if we really look at the story, what I'm willing to put money on is that Joseph was coming into Bethlehem and knew some people because his family's from the city. Said, "Hey, let me stay with you for a little bit while I'm passing through." And then they just had to stay a few extra days because Mary was too pregnant to travel. Don't advise traveling when you're very pregnant. So likely Joseph reached out to somebody he knew and said, "Hey, can I stay with you for a little bit?" And they said, "Sure, but I don't have any room in the inn. I don't have any room in my space, in the guest room." Again, we can't think of inn as commercial inn. It has to be space. Space makes more sense as guest room. I don't have any room here. Somebody else is already staying here. So when Jesus is born in a manger, the manger's inside. They just stayed in there with the family room. Perhaps maybe the stable, if the animals weren't in it. But they likely stayed here in the family room. Which should change the way that we talk about the Christmas story. I'm willing to back this up, especially for another reason. In Matthew 2:11, Matthew writes, Matthew's telling the story of the three wise men, three shepherds. Missed it. They hear about the birth of Jesus, and they want to come see him. So they go to Jerusalem and say, who is he that has been born of the King of Jews? For we saw his stars when he rose, and we have come to worship him. And Herod heard that and was troubled. He hadn't heard about this news before. And he's like, well, I thought I had all the babies set to be killed. Well, they told him, well, he's in Bethlehem. And he's like, I haven't heard about it. Go check it out for yourself. And so they go. And so they go, and they travel there. In 2:11, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with joy. And going into the house, they saw a child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. So likely, they were staying in a house, not out in the middle of the cold with all the animals. But they were taken care of. Here's another reason why I think that they were taken care of. These shepherds, when they come, they leave. They offer him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And they leave. Let me ask you a question. If you come across some people who have a baby, and he's supposed to be the Messiah, and they can't provide for him, and they're sitting out in the cold, and they have him in straw, do you let them keep that baby? Or at least, do you offer to stay and help? They leave. They leave because he's taken care of, he's trusted. So there's a couple things that this means for us for this story. First of all, it's not actually what you think it has been for the last however long you've been alive. Secondly, he was taken care of from the very beginning. But let's talk about the shepherds for a second. Shepherds were like among the lowest of the societal standings. So ancient Near East would have been sort of a caste system like, where you have your priests on top and or kings on top and then priests below that. Very, your job defines who you are. And shepherds were sort of at the bottom. Not quite the untouchables and not, people like that, but shepherds were at the bottom. When they heard about this Messiah coming, they were terrified. They were scared that they were going to come in and they were going to find him in a palace with tons of gold and just wealth and importance, because that's what it would have symbolized. But instead, they find him in a house where they're not rejected, but they're welcomed. They thought the Messiah would be born in a place of high standing, but he wasn't. He was born in a common place. He was born among us, which is good news for us, because he's born in a house where all are welcome, including the lowly shepherds. So from the very beginning, the gospel of Jesus is saying that it's for you. It's saying that I don't exclude. Right from the very birth narrative, before Jesus is even born, there are so many things pointing to saying, this is not just for the Jews. This is not just for the Pharisees. This is not just for the nation of Israel, but this is for everybody. This is for the lowest of the low. This is for the Gentiles and the Jews. It's for anybody. Because anybody can get into a house, especially just a common house. Anybody's welcome into a house. One last thing about the story. When Jesus is placed in the manger, of course, they don't just take a naked baby and lay him in the haystacks. They wrap him in cloth. According to the law, when a lamb is getting ready to be sacrificed, God demands that the lamb is perfect, without defect. So what they would do is they would take him and they would wrap this cloth around him. They would swaddle him in this cloth. So that way it couldn't hurt himself, because this lamb was offered to God. And they needed to do something without defect. They wanted to make sure he didn't get hurt. And then they would sacrifice him. Or it. And Jesus is wrapped in this cloth. Likely because of the stable and the manger, the same cloth that they would have used for sacrificial lamb. So when the shepherds come up, not only are they relieved because of their accessibility to him, but they get that image of a sacrificial lamb. They see that passage from Isaiah of the suffering servant. And they rejoice. And they look at this child was taken care of well. And they trust. So I tell you all this, not to show how smart I am, because every single thing that I've pointed out is just me ripping off of somebody else. Somebody else that has done the hard work. But I say all this to prove my point that Jesus was born in a house and he's taken care of from the very beginning. And that's good news, because that means that the door's open. That means all you have to do is come knock. That means that person that you've been asking to come, it means the door's open for them too. And that means that from the very beginning, the message of the gospel has always been Jesus has come for everybody, and he has come to die for everybody.